Trump's pattern of discrediting unfavorable data. When it comes to challenging unfavorable data, President Donald Trump follows a familiar script. From altering the narrative around the coronavirus pandemic to questioning the legitimacy of the 2020 election, Trump has consistently sought to reshape the story to fit his narrative. And now, with the release of the revised July jobs report, which highlights a struggling economy, Trump is once again taking action to discredit the numbers and the people behind them. The most troubling aspect of this isn't just the numbers. It's the precedent being set for how future administrations might handle data. On a recent Friday, when the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, released its revised jobs report showing a significant slowdown in hiring, Trump wasted no time in responding. He promptly fired the BLS commissioner, Erica McIntyre, and labeled the report as phony. This move is just one more entry in a long list of instances where Trump has dismissed or manipulated data that doesn't align with his preferred narrative. Douglas Elmendorf, a former director of the Congressional Budget Office and current Harvard University professor, emphasizes the critical role that accurate and unbiased data plays in our democracy. Our democratic system and the strength of our private economy depend on the honest flow of information about our economy, our government, and our society, Elmendorf stated. The Trump administration is trying to suppress honest analysis. But here's where it gets controversial. Trump's strategy of discrediting unfavorable data carries significant risks, not just for his administration, but for the broader economy. By undermining trust in government statistics, Trump risks eroding public accountability and potentially leading to policy decisions based on flawed information. This could have far-reaching consequences for both the president and the country. The White House, however, disputes the notion that Trump is trying to hide or manipulate data. They argue that the revisions to the jobs report, particularly the significant downward adjustments for May and June, raise concerns about the reliability of the data. Kevin Hassett, director of the White House National Economic Council, pointed out that the combined reduction of 258,000 jobs in those months was the largest since 1968 outside of a recession. Hassett maintains that Trump's goal is to ensure that the data is more transparent and reliable. And this is the part most people miss. Revisions to economic data are actually a normal part of the process. Jed Kolko, a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, explains that revisions help balance the need for timely data with the need for accuracy. Revisions solve the tension between timeliness and accuracy, Kolko said. We want timely data because policymakers, businesses, and investors need to make decisions with the best data available. But we also want accuracy. However, the controversy deepens when it comes to the broader implications of Trump's actions. Not only has he dismissed economic data, but he has also challenged other forms of critical information, such as climate change reports. In July, taxpayer-funded reports detailing the impacts of climate change on America were removed from government websites. The White House initially claimed that NASA would republish these reports, but the agency later backtracked, stating that legal obligations had already been met by submitting the reports to Congress. Despite these actions, the White House maintains that transparency is a core value of the Trump administration. On social media, they posted a photo of Trump with the caption, "The most transparent president in history." Ironically, the image showed Trump with his back to the camera, casting a shadow that blocked out most of the light in front of him. Is transparency really about the light being shed? Or is it about who controls the shadows? What do you think? Is Trump's approach to data and information justified? Or does it set a dangerous precedent for future leaders? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Trump's BLS firing explained. Amy Walter, Jasmine Wright on trust in institutions. In a striking move that has raised eyebrows across the political landscape, the White House has firmly maintained that the dismissal of the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, was due to alleged errors made during her tenure. This assertion was made immediately following her termination, as the administration released a document detailing the numerous revisions that occurred under her leadership. The intent was clear: to bolster their narrative that this action was not a reaction to disappointing job reports, but rather a consequence of what they termed incompetence. Interestingly, some Republicans are aligning with this perspective. While it is within the president's rights to make such a decision, there are dissenting voices. For instance, Tom Tillis, a Republican senator, expressed that if there were concrete evidence of manipulated data, then the dismissal would be justified. However, he cautioned that if the firing was merely a response to unfavorable job statistics, then it was time for the administration to grow up. This situation illustrates a complex dynamic within the party, where many Republicans seem to be supporting the president's choices, a trend that has been evident over the past 6 weeks as he exercises his authority over his administration's personnel. Amy Walser from the Cook Political Report adds another layer to this discussion, highlighting a broader issue: the ongoing decline in public trust towards major institutions. She argues that President Trump's actions are exacerbating this distrust. In a recent poll conducted during the 2024 election cycle, voters indicated that their perception of the economy is largely influenced by the cost of living rather than traditional metrics like unemployment rates or GDP figures. This sentiment reflects a growing anxiety among Americans regarding inflation and the rising costs of everyday goods, which has led to some of Trump's lowest approval ratings concerning his economic management. Despite the BLS and GDP figures, the real measure of economic health for many Americans is their personal experience with prices. They are looking at their own financial situations to determine whether the economy is as robust as the president claims. Walter emphasizes that this shift in perspective is significant. Currently, Democrats need to gain just 4 additional seats to regain control in the upcoming midterm elections. However, with potential redistricting in states like Texas and Ohio, they could face an uphill battle, possibly needing to secure as many as 10 or 11 seats to achieve a majority. This scenario is particularly concerning given that in the last midterm elections, Republicans only gained 9 seats, highlighting the increasingly narrow margins in play. California is a state to watch closely, as it presents an opportunity for Democrats to recover some of their losses. They could potentially gain 4 or 5 seats, depending on their strategy. However, they face the challenge of convincing voters who support independent redistricting that a shift to partisan redistricting is necessary to counter Trump's influence. This blue state will serve as a critical test of how far Democratic voters are willing to go in their fight against the current administration. Wright notes that there is a palpable sense of urgency among Democrats, who are responding to calls from their constituents to take a stronger stance against Trump. While the party may feel limited in what they can achieve legislatively, they can still engage in symbolic actions that demonstrate their commitment to fighting back. In recent weeks, Democrats have shown a united front against Trump's proposed legislation, successfully framing it as a Medicare issue to undermine its support. They are also rallying together on the redistricting front, although internal disagreements are surfacing, as seen in discussions involving figures like Cory Booker. The pressing question remains: will these efforts be sufficient to sway voters as the midterms approach? As the political landscape continues to evolve, the effectiveness of these strategies will be put to the test. Why markets aren't panicking over Trump's firing of BLS chief. The sudden dismissal of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS chief, by Donald Trump has sent shockwaves through the financial world. And yet, surprisingly, markets are not hitting the panic button. But here's where it gets controversial. Despite the traditional reliance on BLS data for gauging employment and economic health, investors seem to be shrugging off this dramatic move, focusing on other factors instead. The week started with a jolt when Trump fired BLS head Erica McEnteffer following the release of a disappointing July jobs report. This report showed slower employment growth than expected, which some argue reflected poorly on the administration. Trump's decision triggered immediate concerns about the accuracy and trustworthiness of future government economic data, with comparisons being drawn to China, a country infamous for opaque statistics that many investors find unreliable and thus uninvestable. So why aren't markets storming out in protest? As Monday trading began, major stock indices rallied. The Dow Jones Industrial Average jumped nearly 500 points by midday, while the Nasdaq surged up to 2%. The key driver behind this resilience is the shifting expectations around Federal Reserve policy. The weaker employment data increased the probability of a rate cut in September, a move that generally uplifts equity markets. Certainly, Trump's firing of the BLS chief is unconventional. Anything with this administration tends to be. But investors have a variety of other robust data sources at their disposal, explains Paul Hickey, co-founder of Bespoke Investment Group. Beyond BLS reports, investors rely on a mosaic of private and public indicators. For example, ADP employment data, hiring and firing trends collected by consulting firms, and labor sentiment measurements from organizations like the Conference Board. These alternative datasets help investors cross-check and validate the official government statistics. Alexander Tomic, Associate Dean at Boston College specializing in strategy and innovation, notes, if private data starts to diverge significantly from government releases, it's a red flag suggesting issues with official figures. This layered approach to data analysis instills a measure of confidence among market participants, lessening the impact of any single controversial event. Trump justified McEnteffer's dismissal by accusing the BLS of manipulating data to portray his administration negatively, though he provided no concrete evidence for this claim. White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett supported the accusation by pointing to substantial revisions in the employment figures. These revisions revealed that job growth in May and June was almost 260,000 fewer than initially reported, adding fuel to Republican criticisms of the BLS's data handling. Interestingly, the weaker July jobs report paradoxically serves Trump's interests in one way. It has boosted the likelihood of a Federal Reserve interest rate cut in September to nearly 90%, aligning with the president's long-standing calls for monetary easing. This could provide a significant stimulus to the economy, which Trump has been eagerly advocating throughout the year. From an investor's viewpoint, overshadowing Trump's headline-grabbing actions are solid economic indicators, such as a strong second-quarter GDP report and impressive earnings results, especially from large technology firms. These fundamentals underpin the optimism, driving stock market gains even amid the political drama. The looming question, however, concerns the future leadership of the BLS. Sergio Altomare, former senior enterprise architect at the Federal Reserve, highlights the importance of this succession. The real impact of this firing will take time to understand. The immediate issue is, who replaces McEnteffer? What expertise will they bring? Will the new data collections and analysis differ materially from what the market expects? Until these points become clear, it's tough to fully gauge how lasting the market's calm will be. Fortunately, answers are coming soon. Trump has announced plans to nominate a successor for the BLS chief role and to fill the vacancy left by Fed Governor Adriana Kukla, who resigned last Friday. Both nominations require Senate confirmation, adding a layer of political consideration to the process. Notably, some high-profile figures share Trump's frustrations. Legendary investor Ray Dalio publicly agreed with the dismissal, criticizing the BLS's methodology as outdated and prone to errors, with no clear reforms underway. Dalio pointed out that the recent data revisions actually moved the numbers closer to private estimates, which could suggest the agency's original methods need serious updating. This episode invites several provocative questions. Should government economic agencies be subject to political interference, especially when independent data can corroborate their reports? How much weight should investors place on official government data versus private sector alternatives? And could this shake-up ultimately improve or undermine the credibility of key economic statistics? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you agree with Trump's move? Or do you see it as a dangerous politicization of critical economic information? Share your opinions in the comments and join the conversation.